Good morning, everyone, and welcome to day one here of our My Operations Center digital training. So we'll have day one today, and day two will be tomorrow. Um, so thank you here for attending this morning. So with that, we might as well start a little bit with some introductions. So first off, I'm Matthew Kynock. I'm one of our solution support specialists out of Melita, and I'll be doing some of the presenting here this morning.
I am James Mowat. I'm a field advisor out of Oak Bluff, and I'm going to give Matt a hand presenting today. Hopefully all goes well.
Okay, and then I don't know if Justin might just be in the background there now, but Justin's also online. Justin is one of our field advisors out of Portage, and he'll be one of the ones there in the chat window going over some of the questions you guys might have. So we encourage them as much as possible. So what some of our agenda is going to look like here for the next couple days. Here in day one, we're going to start off with a lot of our setup information. We're going to look at things like our permissions and operations center. So how you guys can see who has access to your data, how you can enable people to have access to your data, and how you can share information with third-party agronomists, things like that. We're going to go over some of our best practices and changes within our map and our setups pages in Operations Center, really focusing on some equipment best practices, some machine details, and showing you guys where release notes are, so you can find out where changes have made into Op Center over time. And then we'll go through lands and products. That'll be James and myself going over some best practices and some of the changes to land that have happened here recently, as well as setting up products, including tank mixes, things like that. And then day two, we will go over and work our way into crop planner and work planner, as well as maintenance from the planning side of things. And then we'll get really into some of the bigger portion into the analyze and looking at the information that we have in Op Center with our field analyzer and our machine analyzer. So there's be some bigger changes in those, depending when the last time it was that you were in Operations Center. So with that, James, here, I'll just advance to the next slide for you.
Yeah, so I just wanted to chat quickly about some of the things you're going to need for getting wirelessly connected to Operations Center and some of the different ways that you can bring information in. So when you're looking at any of your equipment, if you have a 3G or 4G MTG, then you should have the capability to bring data in wirelessly into Operations Center. If it's not set up, then just contact your field advisor or your solution support specialist, and we can help you go through some of the things you have to do to get that equipment set up. But for the most part, it's just activating devices. But that is probably one of the most seamless ways to get your data into Operations Center. If you're running a John Deere piece of equipment or even a competitive piece of equipment and you have a 4G JD in a box, JD Link in a box, then you can get that data brought into Operations Center wirelessly. As soon as you're set up, you go through the field and you move on to the next field. Say once you're done harvesting one quarter section and move to another, that data will automatically be wirelessly transferred into Operations Center. That is by far the easiest way to do it. Some of the other ways are importing it wirelessly through API organizations. So any organization that's connected to Operations Center has an API with it. For example, Climate Field View. If you're collecting data in there throughout the season, but you like some of the capabilities of Operations Center, you can wirelessly transfer that into Operations Center and have all your data in one spot. And one of the most classic ways of doing it is getting a USB and plugging into your 2630 or any other competitive monitor. Just about any one will work. There is a list that's online that shows everything that's compatible for data that can be brought into Operations Center, but we can answer some of that in the chat or maybe put that into the chat bar. Yeah, just grabbing USB. If you've collected your data, all you have to do is plug it into your display. Once you're in there, export the data, and then you can use John Deere Data Manager, which will quickly cover when I go into permissions here, just to import some of that data. And just a couple other notes. There is some guys still using Apex, I think a little bit for ditching, and you can bring any of that Apex information into Operations Center as well. And if you're struggling with that, just contact a solution support specialist or a field advisor, and we can help you out with that. And that's one of the main takeaways. We're going to help you as much as we can here today, But if you're still having trouble, or if you have any questions after today, make sure to reach out to us and we'll do our best to help you out. And that's it for my housekeeping. So let's hope everything goes well here with the screen sharing, and we'll move right into permissions. All right, so can you see my screen, Matt?
Certainly can, James.
Perfect. All right, so we're in our operations center, we're in the setup tab, and we're in the team file here, the team tab. So this is something I really wanted to cover today because it's a great spot to come and see who has access to your operations center. So as a farmer, whoever is the main account holder or whoever sets up their operations center, that is who is in control. So if you're the farmer, you've set up your ENDS operations center account, you have complete control over who has access to it. So right now we're viewing the ENDS demo access account. And I really love this tab because you can see who has what level of access. So you can set up staff members, you can set up operators, you can allow access for partner organizations, and you can allow access for even things like scouting apps. We have Farm Dog Scout, we have Harvest Profit in here, just for a couple examples. And it's a great tab. I absolutely love it because it shows you who is connected to you and what all can they see and do in your operations center. So we'll just take a quick look at some of these things. If we're looking at ENDS Brothers Limited as our, you know what, I'll actually use a staff member. If we're looking at a staff member, we have Dave Ives in here. What kind of access does he have? You can go in here and quickly view and see what he has access to and what he can do in your operations center. And if you decide you want to make some changes, all you do is click on your edit tab, and it's fairly straightforward. It walks you through what increased or decreased level of access will give you. So can he view equipment? Can he edit equipment? Can he manage it? We're going to keep him at 2. We don't want Dave to be making too many management decisions on the equipment right now. And then if we move down to things such as locations access, there is a nice tab in here where you can actually control in locations and work what part of your operations center some people can see. So say you're working with a third party and you want them to be able to view, oh, you know what, my client field number 2 over here, this half of the farm or this part of the farm where we're working with them and we're doing a lot of things, we'll give them access to that client, that half of my operation, but I actually don't want them to see this other half of my operation. I'm working with someone else, or there's some sensitive information in there. You can come in here and control all of that in your permissions tabs here in Teams. So it's very straightforward. Plus or minus tells you what they have access to and what they can edit. And once you make those changes and save it, you're up to date and everything is done. So for instance here, and there is a bit of an update. So one very important thing to look at in Operations Center, and we'll click on it a little bit today and tomorrow just to show you what's going on, but release notes come out, and for each tab you click on, if you click on release notes when you're in the team tab, it'll tell you when they last came out and what changes have been made. So one big change, they just made it so you can delete organizations you're not working with anymore or using, and you can archive or delete any operators. So we'll just go through that really quick while I have you guys here. So we have Matt set up as an operator. You know what? He messed up the other day, and I think I'm gonna have to let him go. So I think I'm gonna go in here and I'm gonna delete Matt. I gotta get rid of him. And then you know what? I realized, geez, I'm actually pretty short-staffed. Maybe I shouldn't have let Matt go. I lost my temper a little bit. I think I'm gonna add you back here, Matt. It's very easy to add operators and staff and give them different levels of permissions. Makes it very straightforward and simple. So there's not a lot more to cover in the Teams tab, but I thought it was very important to show you this today because I really want to drive home that you guys have complete access here. So the only one in our ENDS organization who has the same level of access as you is Cheryl Bartmanovich, and that's because she's our admin. She's our gatekeeper for Operations Center. So if you forget a username or a password, she's who you're reaching out to, and she's resetting it and making sure that everything's running smoothly in Operations Center for you. that's pretty much all I had to cover in here, Matt. So I will get back to our slideshow here and we'll keep things rolling. Ooh, are you able to pull the slides up for me, Matt?
Yeah, I can do that. Just give me a sec here.
Thanks.
Let me go. Okay.
All right. So just a quick recap. You guys have complete control. You control who has access and what they have access to, equipment, fields, locations, things like that. You control all of your agronomic information and you decide who can go in there and view and edit. And it's a very nice thing to go into Teams and view the API organizations to make sure, oh yes, I am still working with that company, or no, I'm not. Maybe I should be cleaning up my access in Operations Center. All right, so I guess I will pass it off to you now, Matt, to cover some of the terminal transfers.
Okay, so the one thing we'll talk a little bit about here is terminal transfers. Now, this is something that customers can do. However, traditionally, it's something that we have done from the dealer level, but it is something that we can show you guys to make you aware. So with it, I'll kind of show you what that step looks like to show you guys how you can transfer machines to other customers or to a dealer. So if you sell your machine privately, or say you acquired a machine from somewhere else other than Enns Brothers, you can also choose to send the machine data when the machine is transferred. So I'll kind of show you what that means and what that looks like. Now, I will make it clear here how ends and how we've done it in the past is that we choose not to send machine data to the next customer. So if you guys trade in a piece of equipment that has machine information on it or equipment performance metrics, we treat that like agronomic data where it's private. So we do not transfer that over to the next owner so they can't see your historical data. So what that kind of looks like, you guys should be able to see my Operations Center screen here now. So when I'm looking at my screen, if I go up here into my Setup tab at the top and I go down to the bottom to my terminals, here it will show, in this case, I should have 2 tractors in my list. Hopefully they're still there. So here you can see we have 2 tractors. We have a 9520RT and a 9420R here in our demo account. And what we can do is we have the ability over here on the side, we can select one or the other. So I could select, say, this 9420R. It opens up the abilities up here at the top for our transfer option. So we could select it. And then what this will do is if you are partnered with the organization, its name would show up here in the list. If you're not partnered with it, which is probably more typical for you guys, um, we can go down in here and you could actually type in the farmer's email address that could be tied to their operations center account. And when you select it, that would then allow you to email basically the machine to the customer for their operations center account. Then down here below, this is where would you like to include the existing equipment performance data? And this is information here. It kind of gives you a breakdown of things like fuel levels, fuel utilization, engine hours, engine utilization, just different metrics. We'll kind of go over that a little bit more tomorrow in the machine analyzer portion. But here it gives you the option, would you like to include it or would you not like to include it? And if you do, the one thing that does happen is the equipment performance data will go to the new producer, but will also continue to be available to you. If you choose no, then you won't see your past equipment information anymore. And only the new owner will see the information that they create once they use that new piece of equipment. So I'm not going to transfer this guy, but that's one of the steps that you can do there. Some of the other things that we can do is go over a few things here in the map page when we start now. So some of the questions we commonly get asked is there's some of the features inside Operations Center here that we're going to kind of quickly go over. So I'm going to kind of use one of these 2 tractors here. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit on this 9420R so you can see it's actually sitting here on our lot in Portage. So when I select it, it gives us a few things like our full serial number of the machine, when the last time the machine called in. So the reason this could be handy is that if you're not getting data from a machine, you can go here and see the actual date that it last called into Operations Center, and you can force a ping to it with this button here. So that will allow you to kind of force it to call in to update its location or information. Kind of gives you a little bit of a diagnostic step there. So below that, obviously, we can see things like our speed, fuel level, and direction, but I'm more interested in some of the buttons down here at the bottom. So the first one and the main one here is our details button. And there's a few key things in here which are nice to see. Um, so the first one being we have our ID for the machine. So in this case, generally within ends, we always give it the model number of the machine, and then we give it the last 6 digits of the serial number, and then potentially the last 3 digits of the store. Now, a lot of questions get asked on how can we edit that. So down here, there's the edit button. If we select it, that's going to allow us then to edit that machine name. So this is where we could then take and change. And if we say didn't want this, say this machine wasn't going to Portage, our O3 store, we could change that and hit save. And now it would just simply be the machine name with the last 6 digits of the serial number at the end. So lastly, some of the other things in here that are important is we have our engine hours. We can see what type of JD Link modem. So in this case, we have a 4G, the serial number, and the software version for it. Over here, which is also nice, we can see for which display is in the machine. So we have a 4600 command center. We see the serial number of the display and the software version. Now, if we had a 2630 in the cab, it would also then show the serial number and the software version of the 2630 if it was hooked up. One of the things that we can expect in the future here that Deere is working on is if there's a Starfire receiver on the machine, it will also give you the serial number of the receiver. The software version of that receiver as well will show up in this list. So one of the changes now happened last year. JD Link connectivity is now free, so it just shows us activated in here. Where before you might have seen things like way back in the day might have been Select or Ultimate, or you might have had just access. So this is one of the things that we can see here. Now below it, these are some of our links that we still have in here. So Machine Analyzer, we'll go over tomorrow. JD Link. Is a way that we can go in and actually view our JD Link information. However, it's kind of changed, and that's one of the things that you guys can expect going forward is that we'll see more and more integration of that old standalone JD Link module where it would focus entirely on historical machine information, and that's going to get more and more integrated into operation itself as a whole over time. Okay. And then below that, I will go over Maintenance Manager briefly a little bit tomorrow morning as well. So some of the things on the side, which is nice, is we do have our alerts. So this is where we can see the alerts for the machine. So in this case, apparently we need to put some fuel in this tractor. But we can see the alerts. Now, one thing to keep in mind, the alerts that show up here will only show for the last month. So these will only be the codes for the machine in the last month. So it's a little bit different than what you used to see in the older JD Link module, where you could see codes, historical codes for a long, long time frame. We have an access for remote display access. We have the ability to click on here and send, say, a setup file directly to the machine. We have our machine offsets that we could view. And then we also have our all machine data, which this might take a second to load. Just give it a minute here. And this is where we could see a lot of our old JD Link information. So this is where we could change our time frame. Say if we wanted to see lifetime of the machine. So we can see the lifetime of it, what our auto track utilization was, system voltages, efficiency manager, fuel consumption, machine state utilization, things like that. All that kind of stuff can be in here. You also have the ability to export this information generally as an Excel spreadsheet. So if you wanted to save this machine, if you did transfer a terminal or traded machines, things like that, you can save it before we transfer the machine out of your account. So, okay, so that's some of the things that we could see in there. We've also got shortcut keys then down here at the bottom on our machine information for remote display access, for our sending a file, as well as to get directions to a machine. So one thing to keep in mind, the directions to the machine, that will be much more accurate and consistent if you have a Gen 4 display. Gen 4 displays with data sync will update their location and operations center ideally every 6 seconds. It will be much faster on the mobile version than it will be on the web version, whereas 2630s will generally only update every, I believe it's like every 5 minutes or so. So they're definitely not as current. So you got to keep in mind if it's a long drive to the machine, your machine could have moved significantly before you actually get to the machine. So, okay. So some of the other things that we can see in our main page here is over here on the left, we have our equipment. And the big reason I'm going to go over this is we will look at what it is like to add a piece of equipment and some best practices for equipment. This is one of the questions we had submitted when when one of our attendees registered. So we can see our different equipment that we have here in our demo account. So one of the things that I can do over here on the right hand side is I have my plus button for adding equipment. So we can go in here and we can add a piece of equipment. So you could input the serial number if it was a John Deere piece of equipment. You can give it a name, give it a make, say whether it's say a tractor or a combine or a self-propelled sprayer, or whether it could be an implement like a piece of tillage or a pull type sprayer or a planter, things like that. And then you can give it a model number. Now, one of the best practices for this, it varies a little bit depending upon the piece of equipment. The answer from Deere is that we should generate the piece of equipment here in Operations Center, then send it to our display. Then while we're in our display, input all of our offsets like we would have normally done in the past. So things like our lateral offsets, our work points, things like that to be added to it. Then take a USB key into the display and then bring that data back into Operations Center. Now we have potentially ran into a couple hiccups with that if we run into especially competitive ISO equipment. So if we had, say, a case planter or a case air seeder running on the display, we can potentially run into a few hiccups with that, and it might be better to generate that on the display first. But that is Deere's answer right now, is to generate the piece of equipment in here first, send it to the display, input all of your offsets, and then bring it back into Operations Center to do your proper file setup. So one of the things I can do is just to kind of show you guys here, I will say, I'm just going to make a fertilizer spreader, for example. So I'll go into, um, see if it shows up, Salford, there we go. We'll say an implement, our implement type. We can search in here, air dry spreader. Then there is no model number, so we just have to give it a model number here. So I'll admit I have no idea what some of their spreaders are, but I guess a 9620 is their very large boom machine. Then we can assign colors to the machine as well, and we can hit add. So once that's done, we can see here it's given us generic implement widths, offsets, and GPS offsets. We can modify them by going in through here, but this is generally then where it would be better to send it to the display, um, put them in the display, and then bring it back into Operations Center. It ends up being a kind of a syncing issue right now with how we load that information in. So, but I'm just going to hit OK for the time being. So now we should be able to see in my list here of my equipment, we do have our dry spreader here in our equipment list. Okay. Last but not least, then over here on the left-hand side, we do have our fields. This hasn't changed a lot over time. We still see all of our client farms and fields and things like that here in our list and the naming structure. So the one thing I will point out, and this is kind of taken from James here a little bit, is 111 is not necessarily the best way to name your client farms and fields. You should probably have a more consistent naming structure than that. But one of the things that we can do even from this list as well is that we can go in here and we can add fields, but we can also go over here to the left, and with our setup button, we can select here and we could choose to export that field or send that information to somebody else, or we can choose to archive that field. Insurance agent won't do anything in Canada, unfortunately. But we can select the archive button and we can then hide that out of the list. So if it was a field that we rented or that we don't farm anymore, or we did some custom farming for somebody, we could select that, archive it, and then won't show up in our general list with the rest of our fields. So um, some of the other things in here, like James mentioned before, over here on the right-hand side, we have our assistance button. When we select it, we also have the release notes option up here at the top, and this will then bring up the release notes that are specific to Operation Center or to things specific for our map page. So this is a really handy place to go in. It actually goes over what some of the changes are and things like that in Operation Center. One of the other things that is actually quite handy sometimes is the help documentation. So in here we can go in and it should open up another page. And in here we can ask questions and get more information for Operations Center. So say I was having questions about what type of display data could be compatible with Operations Center. I spelled that right. So we could go in here and it could show up in the list what type of display data could be compatible. Now, because I just typed display data, that wasn't that specific. So if I go display compatibility, usually up in here, they'll give you some directions. So if we wanted to bring in some TopCon data, maybe you had a Borgo drill and wanted to bring some data in that way, or some Trimble data, it can give directions in here, things like that. A lot of information on how to bring in other types of data. So the help tool can be helpful, but you do have to sometimes be quite specific with what you're typing in here into the search bar. So some of the other things that we can do as well in here is there is some links to YouTube videos. Deere's just very recently actually done a very good job updating their YouTube videos for help. Historically, in the past, some of them were up to 5 or 6 years old. And for those of you that have been with Operations Center for a while, you will be aware that Operations Center has changed quite significantly over the last 5 to 6 years. So they were quite out of date. And lastly, the other one that I want to really clearly point out down here is the feedback button. The development team for Operations Center does directly look at the feedback that is suggested in here. So if you guys are working with Operations Center and there's something that you wish it could do, or there's something, a feature that you would like, things like that, that is a really, really good place to go in there and submit that feedback to Deere. Deere really does look at the operator feedback quite significantly through that box, sometimes even more significantly than the feedback that we can give as Deere dealers or the Deere field team. So I highly encourage you guys, if you have issues, to go in here and submit feedback with some of the features, or if there's something you find lacking in Operations Center. So okay, so with that, the other thing that I should point out is just in our setup, we will go through a lot of the things here in setup. So we've kind of talked about team and terminals. We won't really go into connections much and geofences or curfews. Today with the training. The connections is where we would go in and manage things with our APIs. So different organizations that we can partner with, that we can share data back and forth, things like climate field view, farm dog, snapshot, different companies like that. PCT are examples. And then the geofences are probably one of the least used features that we have, is the ability to draw a geofence or a curfew around a piece of equipment. So if it moves outside of a time frame, you'll get a notification or an alert that your machine's moving when it shouldn't be. So with that, it will probably transition here back to James, and James will go through some things with land with you guys.
Okay, let's just get sharing again here. Perfect. All right, can you see my screen, Matt? Just like to double check.
Yep, I can see your screen.
Perfect. All right. So what you guys can see in here is the land tab. Just so we can save time on loading, I've got it already pulled up, but you click on your setup tab and go into land. Initially, all your fields will show up, and I've just searched 2022 test so that you can see the field that I've pulled up here. And I just want to go through a couple different things that you can do in this tab. It's really the ultimate tab for cleaning up any boundaries you have, making changes, archiving fields, anything. So what we're going to go through here right now is just merging some boundaries in here and seeing what kind of changes you can make in your fields. Right now we have 2022 test pulled up, and that's actually this south field, and you can see within it, it has two shapes. The one is the exterior of the field, and the important part of shape number 2 here is when you have fields that may have obstructions in them. Maybe you have a copse of trees that's somewhere in the middle, rocks in the field, just areas you can't really pass through. It's nice to have that interior boundary, so whenever your data comes in, you're not always seeing this hole where there should be data and there's not, or where you're wondering what's going on there. It's nice to have that internal boundary. You can also make ones that are passable, that will show up yellow, and that's maybe a low spot that sometimes you can't get into and sometimes you can. You'll have seen a little bit of that when Matt was on the map screen. So let's just go ahead and click on some of this, and I'll show you guys how you can make changes and edit these fields. So as soon as I click on this boundary, you can see it's pulled up. You have all these little points here, and you can really drag them around to create whatever you want. So you can come in and hand draw any kind of boundary you want here to make whatever changes you need to make. And it's very simple and straightforward. And if you're wanting to draw a new one, there's all sorts of tabs on the side. If it's a pretty square quarter section that you've got, you can have a rectangle drawing and just quickly pull it over your quarter section and you've got a boundary ready to go. All right. And the next thing I want to go through is just showing this boundary up here is actually, I'm going to cancel these changes. This boundary up here is 2022 north. So right now, these are actually two separate fields that we're looking at. So if I go back, you can see we have a whole bunch of fields here. I'm just going to zoom in on these two. So we have some data in the bottom one. Okay, that looks good, but actually, you know what? I want these two fields to be together. I don't want them to be test south and test north. So I'm going to click on this one. Click on it again. Now it gives me the option to merge. So I want to merge that with 2022 test north, and I want to make this all one field. Great. So now when I'm in here, you can see that three shapes have populated. This is merged. All our boundaries have stayed the same. This might be good if you're looking at this, say that's a drainage ditch that's running through. Now, instead of having these two fields separate, 2022 north and south, you've got them all as one field, but you still have your boundary set up to get rid of that drainage ditch that's running through there. You don't have one big square. But say there is no drainage ditch and you decide, you know what, it all just has to be one shape. You can do anything you want when you're in here. The world is your oyster when you're in the land tab. So I decide, okay, you know what? I want to delete that and just make it very simple. And I can quickly and easily go up and draw whatever boundary I want to draw and save it. And then your work is done and you're ready to go. One other thing I'll highlight as well, say you collected some data, you did some harvest, but you didn't tie a boundary to it. That data is still available. So I can go in here, click on add for this field. Yes, I want to do another boundary, but instead of drawing new, I'm going to pull from a previous operation. So this can be seeding, harvest, spraying, anything. So we're going to call this operation. Oh, and of course I've done this wrong in our live show, and we've merged everything into 2022 test north. So there is no operational data for us to pull in here. So let's go back to our test. Let's roll into this field here. There we go. Okay, perfect. So you'll see that there is no operational data to pull in. We don't have any usable data for this field. All you would see down here, you can see there's no previous operations for the field. It would say harvest. You click on that harvest operation and you save it, and you've created a boundary based off of that. Now, I won't focus too much on this. These are some new features that are in here. I won't click on the release notes, but basically they've just added a bit more functionality in here, so you can now create test lines, guidance lines, and you can create flags as well. So we might as well quickly try this. We have a track. We want to add a straight track. Our implement spacing is going to say 40 feet. And we're going to associate it with 2022 north. So now that I've clicked through that, you can see this pointer here. You can click on any part of the field and make your guidance line. So we're going to call this 90. That'd be our wonderful guidance line. And then you can see here, you can actually change any of your headings. You can edit this as much as you want. We're going to keep our track spacing at 40 feet. And you know what? I actually want this to be 500 feet. So I'm going to edit this track and create it this way. Perfect. Now I have a guidance track that I've loaded into this field. It's ready to go. I'm going to send that out to my operator and he's going to be ready. But oh, wait a second. I actually remembered that there is a rock over in this corner. I better add a flag just so he's got something there to remind him that there's an obstruction. So quickly go into your add tab, click new. I have a whole bunch of different things I can add in here. You can create anything you want for a flag, whether it's a test you're doing or whether it's an obstruction. you can add a flag category and make that flag whatever you want. Now that I've added it there, I simply click on my boundary, and for notes, I'm going to say, watch out. We've created a flag. So that's just a quick way of showing this. It's not going to get a lot of use from a lot of people, but I thought it was important just to quickly cover it and make you guys aware of some of the things you can do in this land tab. All right, so if we go back to the start here, one other thing that I really want to show you is just archiving fields. So as Matt talked about earlier, if I see 111 in your operations center, I'm not going to be happy. Please do not ever do that. It's very important that you set things up client farm field. That's how everything revolves in operations center. So if you are one farm operating, you should have client name, your farm name, farm one, and your field, it should have its own unique name. So you can use numbers, you can use names, whatever you do, that's fine. Just make sure that your field name is always the same. So if you are going to put in rocky patches for field, if you're spelling patches with an S in one or an apostrophe S in another, that's going to make a difference. It has to be exactly the same every time. And that's important because when you make these boundaries, the data that you create is going to go into them. So if you have two boundaries, one that has an apostrophe in it and one that does not, that data is going to get lost between those two boundaries. It'll go into one and you won't view it in another. It becomes quite a mess. So it's very important to have client farm fields set up properly and just use one naming system. And that will save you a lot of headache for when you're in the field trying to pull up a new boundary or when you're trying to look at some of your data in here. But another important function of this is I hate field 111. So I've decided, you know what? I don't use it anymore. It has no purpose. I'm going to archive it. And this function is very important. So you can see in here, this field just has a cross through it and a couple dashes around it. There is no boundary created for it. There's no guidance lines, no flags. So it's very easy to just archive this field. And the best part about it is when you archive something, it's not gone forever. So this function is very great when you're working with a field that maybe you're splitting up in odd years. So you farm it all as one year, and then you split it into two fields another year to do different crops on it. So an important thing to do is go into your archives. You can get rid of that one boundary the year you're not using it when you're treating it as one. Yes, here I have it. It's in archives. And then the next year you decide, yep, I'm going to treat that field as two. So I'm actually going to make it available again. Now, as soon as you click on that, you'll see it when you go back into your land tab. And one important function that we will cover here that I don't like to talk about too much is the delete function. So when you have a field that's in archives, now you have the option to delete it. So you say, let's search for it. You're looking for field 111 and you say, I don't need that. I'm never going to use it again. You can delete it and it will be permanently gone from your operations center. Just be very careful when you're playing with these files. You do not want to delete a boundary you're still going to use. It's very important to realize that once it has been deleted, it is gone forever. So those are just a few of the functions that are available in the land tab. It's a very easy way to set up a boundary, send it to your equipment, and be ready to roll maybe on a new piece of land that you haven't worked with before. Then you're not having to create a boundary right when you're out there. You have something to work with. And once you've gone and run through that field, that data will come in here. And if you want, you can create a new boundary that'll be right tight to your seeding operation by going into boundaries and making a boundary from a previous operation. That way your data has come in and everything is working perfectly. If you have all your boundaries set up in land well, then when Matt's walking through the setup file creator later, you'll see that it's a big benefit. So that's all I really wanted to cover in there for now. So I guess I will pass it back to you, Matt. But any questions in the chat, hopefully Justin can get to them. And if we miss anything, just let us know. We will have room at the end, hopefully, to cover off some of the questions and show them live. We'll just see how things go.
Better unmute myself. Yeah, I'll just actually I'm going to answer one or two of them here just right now. Um, So yeah, Ron, you can have there's a snap to feature for the guidance lines in Operations Center, so you can. I guess Ron asked, can you set up AB lines that are a best fit for a side of a field, so you don't know the heading or which AB points to use? There is a snap to fit. One of the things that we can look forward to, probably not this year, but probably I'm hoping next year, is that Deere is going to come out with. Best fit to boundary, so it should work for broad acres. So if you have a good exterior boundary for the field, it will auto populate guidance lines for best fit based on your implement width for the field. So that will be something that will be nice that we can kind of look forward to. One of the other questions we had here from Jeff: how do we import boundaries from equipment to operations center? And that is a good question. So generally, what happens is, you guys can see my screen here now. So I've just made a few dummy farms kind of here for me to play with in operations center in our demo account. Um, and I'll pick one of my fields down here is my pivot field. Um, and we can see here in the pivot field, there's active boundary, but there's also inactive boundaries that you could have. So you could have multiple boundaries for the field. And what happens is generally speaking, if you're running a lower level of guidance, SF1, SF2, even SF3, you're going to have drift of the boundaries as you create them in the field. So by default with Operations Center, it is set that your boundaries do not automatically come in into Operations Center every time you create them. Otherwise, for an example, for the field, you could end up with, in one season, potentially 6 or 7 different boundaries in your list. So for simplification, they leave that turned off by default. So if you go up here into your organization preferences and the gear here, James was kind of in this one a little bit earlier. But if we scroll down here to our, I believe it's my settings here, and scroll down, there should be an option in here, auto import boundaries. So in this case, we have it turned on. But this gives us the ability in here that to turn it on, so then all of the boundaries come in automatically as you generate them. Otherwise, the only way to do it with this turned off is to manually stick a USB key in and import those boundaries into through Data Manager to bring them into Operations Center. So hopefully that kind of clears that up a little bit. Jeff, a little bit as to why it does it that way and kind of the logic or the idea behind that. So okay, so I think that's all the questions we've got answered there for now. Okay, so to continue in setup now, I'm going to continue to go down here and I'm going to go into my products. So we can see in here now, I'm into my products. There's a few things that we can look at in here, kind of like we could see with land. We have the ability here for available products, and we have the ability to look at archive products. We can also filter and search through them by what brand or manufacturer, the product category for them, what type they are, things like that, what type of form. And we can filter through these things. And then inside the list, we can see all of our active products that we have in the list. So one of the things that we like to see is a nice, clean, consistent list. And one of the reasons why this is we don't like to see things in here like L233P, L233, 233P, lowercase or high or capitalized letters. We don't like to see multiples and duplicates of different varieties or chemicals, crop types, things like that in here. So this is where we have the ability to go in and we can edit them, or we could choose to archive them or delete them. So those are some of the options that we have with the products in here in the list. So what I'm going to do is, I don't know if, well, I think a lot of customers generally don't generate the products in here. So I'm going to do a really quick kind of run through on how we do this. So I'm going to go up here to the top right and I'm going to add a product. So up here at the first part, we have our category. So with it, I can select and I can choose first off whether I want to add a chemical or whether I want to add a variety. So I'm going to simply go into my variety in here, for example. And then over here on the right, I can select my crop type, and it's going to be a huge list of crops in here. So you're probably better off searching like this. So I can do, actually, I'm going to do wheat, sorry. Wheat. So then we have a bunch of different types of wheat. So I'm just going to pick hard red spring. Now, one thing you might notice is that we only have 2 different varieties of wheat in here. And the reason for that is the list is going to pull up all of the registered varieties that are in the US, not in Canada. So that's not super helpful for us for a lot of things. So that's where we need to go in here to the can't find what you're looking for option, and we can select it. So now if we go in here, say I wanted to add Starbuck wheat, um, uh, Do not remember who makes it, so I'm just going to pick Secan. Then over here, if we had a registration number, we could add it, our type. In this case, oops, should have picked variety over here at the start. Now under my crop type, I can go in here and select wheat, my hard red spring, and I can hit save. So now we can see over here on the right-hand side, we have our Starbuck wheat here under the list. Okay. Now, if we wanted to add a chemical, we can actually do that at the same time. We could switch to a chemical. We could go in here and say we want a herbicide, and there will be a huge pile of herbicides in the list. But obviously, kind of the same thing at the bottom. That's or if we can't find something, we can select add it on here. But for simplicity purposes, I'm just going to say search for atrazine. Now, I don't have a hot clue which one of these is the one we should pick, but I'm just going to select this one and hit next. So now we have the two of them in the list. And if I hit next, now it wants us to make sure that we've picked the right herbicide and then what form it comes in. So whether it was dry or whether it was a liquid. Um, uh, so I'm going to select dry because DF probably stands for dry formulation. And once I hit save, now those herbicides will be in our list. Okay. So once they're in our list, what that allows us to do, um, uh, what we can do is we can generate more things with it like tank mixes. So the tank mixes is ideally how we want to be able to do our documentation, say when we're working with our sprayers. Okay. And the reason we want to do that is because it ties in with how the data comes back into Op Center. We actually see the accurate and the right amount of chemical that's going to be applied on the field, as well as if we end up doing things with Harvest Profit or Ag World when we're starting to look at some of our costing per acre, that's where the tank mix really becomes important. So some of the tank mixes, I've already made a couple in here. So I will pick this one up here at the top to show you guys what it looks like. So I have made one here for Extendamax soybeans. So I have selected that we're applying at a base solution rate of 10 gallons to the acre. I have then selected when I made the tank mix, Roundup and Extendamax products, and I've inputted exactly how much of that product we're going to be applying. Now, the one downfall, actually, I should do this way. I'm just going to make it so I can show you guys. So in here, 10 gallons to the acre. So in here, we can select my products from my list. So in here now, I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to select my Extendamax. I'm going to select my Roundup, my blind. Right there. Wow. Okay. So there's my Extendamax and my Roundup. So now I can hit my save button. Okay. And this is a key question. Jeff has asked this. Can we convert to liters per acre in Operations Center? And this is kind of why I decided to show you guys. So now that we have our two products saved in my list of how I want those units to be applied, I only have the option of gallons an acre, flowable ounces, pints, or quarts. I do not have the option here in the tank mix generator in Operations Center to do liters per acre. We've given feedback to Deere. This is one of the things I would encourage you guys to use that feedback button for an Operations Center is to submit that we would like to be able to do this in liters per acre or even view our data in liters per acre. But in this case, we're stuck with something like doing like this. So like I think about 34 flowable ounces is a liter. Um, so I'm just going to put, excuse me if my numbers are not correct, but I'm just going to put something in there. Now, the nice thing that it does do is it knows with our 39 flowable ounces combined with our product, it deducts that from our base rate of that 10 gallons an acre that we used here at the top to show that we're going to put on that much actual water. And we can actually include things like mixing instructions and stuff like that in here as well. And it will even show you how much of each product you will need to use. So if we have a 1200 gallon sprayer and we need to spray, say, 800 acres, we can show on here that we're going to need up to 6 tanks. It's going to show us how much of each actual product we're going to need. And we can even choose the option to split out our partial tank to know exactly how much of our chemical will be needed for that last tank. So these are some of the things that we can do in our tank mix creator. So then we can go next. So one of the nice parts that we can do with this as well is that then we can go in here and we can name our tank mix. So I can say soybean Extendamax because we're probably not going to be applying our Extendamax on anything other than our soybean tolerant soybeans. But in my crop type, I can also go in here and select soybeans as well. So it's going to be designated to our soybean fields. So then I can hit save. and then it will show up in the list. And you can see over time, I've made several of my extended max soybeans as examples, but we can see the example here. We could click on it or edit it. We can also click on it and then we can choose to select it and move it, or we could choose to archive a tank mix as well. So now, for those of you that do have Gen 4 displays in your sprayer with up-to-date software, you can generate tank mixes in the display as well. You do have the option in the display on our Gen 4s to actually build it as a liter per acre tank mix. Now, the only unfortunate part is once you've applied it and that data goes back into Operations Center, it will still show up in gallons per acre and things like that. So it's kind of a little bit of a disconnect right now, but unfortunately, apparently Canada is the only place in the world that really uses liters per acre. So that's kind of everything there from our products perspective. So hopefully that kind of show you guys a few quick examples of what that kind of looks like. Um, but the next step that we're going to do here now is we're going to go into our setup builder. So it's kind of the last step here under our setup for a lot of you guys, and we're going to go into our setup file creator. So once we go into it, how we build our setup files is really based upon everything that we've kind of gone through here this morning so far. So we can see where James went through our land, where I went through our equipment, where I've added products, where James added an operator, and then we'll see our summary at the end of what we've made for our setup file. So the first step that we need to do is we need to select what type of display that we're building our setup file for. So probably for the most majority of you, you're going to be building them for a 2630 or one of our newer Gen 4 displays. The second option most likely will be our Greenstar 2 2600 displays. So keep in mind that our setup files are different when they're generated. So I'm just going to select our 2630 and Gen 4 displays up here at the top. Now I need to give it a name. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say I'm going to call this my spreading setup file because I made that spreader earlier. Now we have two different options that we can create setup files with. One we can create from new, starting from scratch. The other one that we can do is create from an existing setup file. So if I had already made a setup file, but I wanted to make changes or I wanted to add some products or fields or things like that, I could go create from existing. And any of the existing setup files that we've made, you could go in here and select these existing ones that have been made. It already has a certain amount of existing things in it, like products or machines or fields, and then you can then work from what you already have. So this is really, really nice if you are working with 2630 displays. So I should make that clear here right now. One of the big differences between our previous displays and our newer generation displays is what happens to the displays when we send our setup information to them. So if we create a setup file and we send it to one of our Gen 4 displays, it's going to add that setup information to what is already on the display. It's not going to overwrite anything or delete anything. But if you're working with 2630s or 2600s, when you generate a setup file and you send it to the display, it is going to overwrite everything that is on the display. So if you forget a crop type or chemicals or like client farms and fields and some things like that, you're going to have to go back in here, add those ones that you missed or forgot, or you changed your rotation, you changed some chemicals in a pinch. There was a shortage, which we not going to get into that for this year. But say you needed to change a product last minute, you then can go into your setup file, take the existing one, add what you were missing before, and then send it to the display, and it will have all of it there on the 2630. So but anyways, so we're going to start one from new for simplicity for this case. So I'm going to create new, and then I'm going to hit my start button down here in the bottom right. Once I'm in here, now we can see a lot of things in here with my client farm and field. So I'm going to use the test field that James had earlier, but one of the easiest ways to do that is James field had test 2022 in it. So it might actually be easier to search 2022. I searched 2022. So here we can see James's fields. There was the test and the test north with his guidance lines and his rock flags. So I'm going to select James test north field here. So as long as I have one field selected, that's fine. I don't necessarily need to have guidance lines or rocks or boundaries selected. Okay, and you can kind of see here easily, it breaks it out by type here on the right hand side. We can see boundary, flags, and our straight track guidance lines. So now that I got my field selected, I'm going to hit next over here on the right hand side. And then now I need to add my equipment. So in this case, I'm going to use that 9420R that we had over here. And then I also need to select an implement. So up here at the top, I need to go over to my implement. And this is where I'm then going to go in and I'm going to find that spreader that we made earlier. So here's my Salford spreader. So once I have at least one type of equipment selected, I can select next as well. Once I go into a next, then I have all of my products. So because I have a fertilizer spreader picked, I'm going to pick on here my 1152 as my uh, product. Now, if it was a sprayer or something like that, we could also go in here and select our tank mixes that we had made previously. Now, if we were building this, say, for an air seeder, that's where you could then go in and pick multiple different products, multiple different seed types, things like that as well, and you could select them all and send them at once as well. You don't need to pick just one product. So then I'm going to hit my next button again. So now we have my operators in here. James decided not to fire me. He hired me back after my screw up. So I'm going to select in here that I'm going to be the one out there applying. Uh, Now, oddly enough, the operator is the one thing that you don't have to select. You don't have to select an operator to go to the next step. Um, but I'm going to go to next. So now I have my summary page here. So here we can see my display type. So we can see 2630 and my Gen 4 displays. I can see the name of my setup file. I have my fields, my boundary, my guidance, my flags. I had variety locator if that was some existing information for the field. I see my machines, so I see my tractor and I see my spreader that I added, my product of my 1152 fertilizer, and then the operator being myself. Now you can always go back if you forget to add something. You can always back up through steps, which is good. You don't have to back up and start from the beginning. So once your setup file is you're happy and everything is in there that you kind of need, we can sit here and go create file. Now, there's two options that we have in here at this point. So if we have a piece of equipment that is wireless data transfer enabled or it has JD Link and we have a 2630 or a Gen 4 display, we can select on here that it would automatically send it to it. So we could click here, create and send. However, if we wanted to create it and we wanted to send it later, or we maybe needed to load it onto a flash card for a 2600, that's where we can create it without sending. So what I'm going to do actually in this case is I'm going to click create and send. So now we can see right now that this setup file is being created. Once it's created, it will be available in files and it will be sent to all of those wirelessly dated machines. So we can see here now it has been completed. But if we always want the option to download it, we can always click on this guy here and it's going to download it as a zip file. And that's how we can put it onto some of our compact flash cards or a manual USB key or install it uh, through our setup manager. The other way to do is we can go here to our files. We can also get to files here under the more option. So our files will show up in the list, as well as the option here to download that John Deere data manager. So in here we can see there is my spreading setup file that I just made. It shows that it was transferred to that four-wheel drive that's sitting there in Portage. Shows the client farm field information. It shows that it was a setup data or setup file, the size and the date. Now, one of the things that's also nice in here too is that we can see when files have actually came in from machines as well. So for you guys are looking at it from your own account, if you're thinking of files haven't come in and stuff like that, we can see on here that files have come in from these two different four-wheel drives. It shows here that it was documentation data, a timestamp on them as well, and the size of them. So it's kind of a way to you can actually physically go in and see whether the files are actually coming in into Operations Center as well. So if you ever go into your map page, your field analyzer, which we'll go into tomorrow, and you can't see that information there, this is kind of a way to confirm that. So okay. So with that, I think that's kind of everything that we kind of have set up to show you guys today. Um, I'm just looking here at the questions in the chat. I think at this point we've answered most of them.
Very quickly, Matt, there's two
Yep.
things I want to cover from some of the questions there. One about that liters an acre. So I'm
Mhm.
probably going to put my foot in my mouth here, but I believe we have it set up with a customer right now. So if you have a Gen 4 display, I think he's running a 4640. If he changes it to metric in his display, he has the options for liters an acre in there. So that customer did that in 2021, was able to document all of his spraying operations in liters an acre. And the reason we wanted to do that was we're doing financial tracking with this customer. So he was actually entering all of his chemical rates in there. It would show up in liters an acre. It was easy for him to set up. The one problem is it hasn't been added on the operations center side. So it's easy for him to add it in the display. It works well for figuring out his chemical rates. The problem is, as soon as it goes into operations center, it automatically converts to whatever you have there. So if you're set imperial, it goes to gallons an acre. If you were set to metric in operations center, it'll go to liters per hectare. But I want to point out the advantage of this. He is still able to do his financial tracking very well. All of his rates are coming in properly into operations center. They are switching to gallons an acre, but we know that those numbers are correct. So there is still an advantage there, and we're looking forward to Operations Center figuring out liters an acre. It's definitely a big challenge, though it's not as easy as it sounds when you're trying to mash together imperial and metric. One other thing as well, there was a question for John Deere Data Manager. I know we covered it, but I just want to show it really quickly here. You could see in Matt's Files tab, there was an option for John Deere Data Manager. What you do is click on that and you actually download it, and it will show up like this once you've created your shortcut key and that download is done. And this is how you will upload a lot of that USB data. So you'll open up your John Deere Data Manager. It's going to ask you where you are getting your files from. So I have my USB plugged in. Here's my 2021 seeding. There's my 2630 data. I select that folder and immediately pops up. I just have a setup tab here because I don't want to load actual data in and mess everything up. But you can see there's your setup information. Where are you sending it to? I'm sending it to ENS demo access. And then you simply click upload, and just like that, your information is in Operations Center. So I just wanted to show that really quickly for you guys.
One thing I should point out too, though, for those of you that may use a Mac computer, Data Manager was not compatible with Mac computers in the past. Now it is, so that's kind of nice. It will work on those computers. Yeah, I guess the only thing we really had one last slide, just a little bit. I guess it's a little bit of a plug, but I want this one.
So this is something we have designed specifically for Operations Center and data management. So field advisors, if you have trouble getting, if your customer is having trouble getting their data in, or you're just saying, you know what, I am too busy. I see all this stuff in Operations Center. It's valuable, but I am too busy to do all this. That's why we created the John Deere My Operations Center setup. It's $900.10 an acre. And really what that is a field advisor coming out and setting up your displays, helping to make sure that your setup files are created properly. And if you have equipment that's connected for seeding, spraying, and harvest, then we'll come out after seeding, we'll come out after spraying, and we'll come out after harvest to make sure that we get that data off of that equipment and into your operations center in an organized way. So I think this is a very affordable and handy option for guys that are really trying to get into operations center and are just getting their feet wet. There's always troubles in that first year of data collection. So I think this is a good tool to get an experienced person on your farm and help you out. And the data management services below is for having a solution support specialist come out and walk you through some of it, clean up some of that data from historical platforms, get things from Apex in. And GIS work is more map creation, so that's a little bit of a different story. But I really wanted to cover that today, just so you guys know you have an option. If you're just too busy and you don't have the time, but you really want to get this data in, it's something we can do for you. And that's pretty much all I have. We just had to do the pricing spiel at the end to to get that out there.
I guess the one thing too, one of the questions we had in here, Ron was just asking about, um, bringing over some of the products and stuff like that to operations center, and it kind of ties back to the boundaries. So I'm just going to share my screen one more time here. So I'm back in my organization preferences like I had before, And down here under my import options, there's also the option here for products to never import, and that is the default setting for it as well. So it will never, if you're inputting in your display what type of products you're applying, whether it's varieties or chemicals, the default setting for it is to never actually import them from the display so that it that potentially doesn't end up with all kinds of duplicates and things like that, kind of like I mentioned before with that canola variety example. So it is defaulted that way, but if you were starting with no products whatsoever in your op center and you were doing good documentation in the display, turning this on could be a good way to maybe start for some of your products coming in. So
Yeah, it's very valuable making those setup files and sending them out so you're not creating multiple boundaries in field during the season. You're not adding a whole pile of products. You've already got them entered and you can just select them and away you go. As soon as you have someone entering a whole lot of products or different operators running through the season, you might have 5 liberties spelt all different ways. And if you have this turned on to import it, it's all going to come into your operations center and just make a mess of everything.
yeah, there's positives and negatives to some of the things of turning on some of these import options. So with that, I think we've answered most of the questions in there. So unless anybody has any last questions, we're kind of already a little bit after the 1 hour we had set for today. Um, but if you guys have any questions, feel free, type them in the chat pod. If not, that's kind of all we have set up for today. Hopefully we see most of you back for tomorrow morning. We'll be going through, like I mentioned, a lot of the analyzer tools and things like that. Especially in Field Analyzer with the merger between Field Analyzer and Field Analyzer Beta, there's a lot of changes and different things that we're going through with it. So
Yeah, there is one more question that came in here. Do we lock the organization setting normally? I'm assuming you're talking about the organization preferences tab. No, that is something that the farmer controls. They go in there and they change their organization preferences as they want. So that's not something that we control from Enns Brothers.
mhm.
But yes, one last thing, please reach out to your field advisors and solution support specialists if you want a little bit more one-on-one training or you have some more advanced questions. We try to cover the basics in here today, but there's definitely a lot of one-off things that you that I'm sure there'll be questions about. So if you have those questions, reach out to your local solution support or field advisor and we'll help you out.
Yep, that's why we have this team is to support you guys with this kind of information and using a lot of these features and to enable a lot of the technologies that you guys will have in your equipment to try and make things easier for you guys this spring as well. So eventually once the snow melts, everyone's going to want to go pretty quick. So
All right, well, I guess we can stop rambling then. We seem to have covered it off and I guess we'll try and meet up with everyone tomorrow.
perfect. Thanks guys. Enjoy the rest of your day and we'll hopefully see you tomorrow morning.